Hello everyone, you're listening to the Eiffel Tower podcast. My name is Oliver G, and if you're anything like I am right now, you're probably in lockdown in Paris. Well, that's at least where I am, and I figured we could all probably use a little bit of light-hearted fun, a little bit of entertainment in our life, so I thought I'd do a bonus episode for you today on the podcast. What you're about to hear now, is my chat that I've just finished. I was invited to speak at the American Library of Paris. Now, as much as I'd love to go on about how cool it would have been to be in that library where so many esteemed authors have spoken before, we did this one on Zoom and almost 100 people were watching it from around the world, but I figured, why not have a few extra people listening? It was me interviewing myself, which is kind of fun, talking about my memoir, Paris on Air. If you're brand new around here, you'll probably find this it's probably pretty revealing, I guess. If you've even read the book, I think there'll be loads of new stuff in there for you, like particularly the stuff about the red thread running through the book. And I also talked about Kylie the Crocodile, our new children's book. So just a little bonus episode, keeping everybody going, I hope. And nothing else to say. There's even sort of comments and emails at the end because people were writing in questions live on the Zoom chat. So thanks to the American Library of Paris. Thanks to those who attended. And, as much as it was my honor to be invited there, it's also my honor to share this chat with you. If you want to get the memoir, theeiffeltower.com/memoir. If you want to get Kylie the Crocodile and you want to get in time for Christmas, theeiffeltower.com/croc. Let's get into it, guys. Thank you very much for having me, and it is weird, isn't it? Because I was thinking as I was getting ready how much fun it would have been to do this in the library, but we'll make the most, and I'll do my best to make this an entertaining Zoom, not just that, but an interactive one. I'm sure you guys have done a lot of Zooms lately. We're going to find ways to make this fun. When I say interactive, if you fancy something's funny, you can laugh by moving your head wildly back and forth. If you find something, there you go, some of you got it already. If you find something's applause-worthy, you can just wave your hands in the air. That way, because I'm looking at you all now, and it'll feel like we're in a real room. But honestly, thank you very much to the American Library of Paris for having me. I think this is going to be really fun. It's an honor to be here, and they gave me the option of having someone to interview me, or I could interview myself. And I thought, rather than risk some interviewer sending me some curveball question that I'm not ready for, I could potentially avoid it by writing my own questions for myself. Also, I have a feeling I know what you guys maybe want to know. So I've written 7 questions for myself. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat, and I'm going to be reading your questions and going as we go as well. But the first thing that I wanted to do before we get anywhere, I just want to know how well you guys know kind of who I am. So I'm looking at all of your faces now. If you already feel that you know my world pretty well and who I am, wave your hands like crazy just for a second. Okay. Alright, okay. That's pretty good. Well, I think like 70%, I'd say 70% waving. So for those of you who is that little one? Ashley's child there looks to be having fun. Hello. So for you guys who have no idea who I am, and apologies to you guys who really do know, but I'll do the brief version. My name's Oliver G, and I came to Paris 2015 as a journalist, which, as many of you guys probably remember, was a very tough time for the country. There were terror attacks. I came the day after the Charlie Hebdo attack to cover that as a journalist. I did that for a couple of years working as a journalist, switched to try and make a career as a podcaster, and against the odds, I think I've done it. And along the way, I've written this book, which is the reason that I'm here talking. And when I say podcast, it's half an hour every week where I interview interesting people who make the City of Light shine. And according to the New York Times, it's one of the best travel podcasts in the world. There's my introduction of myself. I feel like that's a fair sort of 60 seconds. But the reason I'm here is to talk about this book that I wrote that's over my right shoulder, Paris on Air. And just once again, can I just know who's already read it? Just by a wave of hands? Alright. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm expecting some questions from you guys towards the end or as we go. But the gist of it is really that book covers the last 5 years in Paris. And I've written these 7 questions to get through. And I'll start with the obvious one is, why did I write a book about Paris? A lot of people, when they hear the word memoir, they think, it's sort of your whole life story, something that's written by, or maybe a celebrity or someone who's 80 years old and has done everything already. Why did I write a book like this? Well, there's a few reasons. First is, I've read a lot of books about Paris, a lot of memoirs, and it feels to me that a lot of them were written by women. And then it feels to me that the men who've written them tend to be kind of different from me in that often they're quite older than I am, I think. And then the second thing I've noticed, I'm not sure if you've noticed the same thing, but they tend to be fairly on their way up climbing the ladder of life and success. They're quite firmly planted somewhere near the top, experiencing things that many people, including myself, never do. Whereas me, I feel like I'm on that ladder. I feel like I'm maybe hanging on to the bottom rung, or at least I was when I got here, slipping, dangling with my legs below, hanging out in different places, fighting and struggling to get by and to try and make an honest man of myself, I guess. So I felt like I was coming at it from a different perspective. There was that. I felt like I had a really interesting time that I was here. Like partly just coming here as a journalist to cover that Charlie Hebdo, then of course what happened in the tragedy in November, the Bataclan and everything, all those terror attacks. But then, just being here through these past 5 years, seeing all the changes, reporting on them, and then trying to, turn that into a podcast and make a career out of a hobby, a podcasting that's still quite new to people, especially to me, I felt like my story was kind of unique. And then thirdly, I just really like telling stories. If you listen to my podcast, you'll know that as well as interviewing people, I like to tell stories, unusual stories. We'll get into some of them in a minute. And it just seemed ripe. It seemed like a ripe opportunity to write a book. And then the last reason that I wrote it as well was because, weirdly, podcasting's still quite new to a lot of people. And even especially in France, many French people, when I meet them, they say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a podcaster." I don't know if you other guys have noticed this, speaking to French people. A lot of French people can't even pronounce the word podcast. Like they say podcast, like it's... are there any French people here? I'll be very interested. There is Jessica Montluc. You look like a French name, yeah. So it's quite a weird job to do and to grow it. And it also occurred to me, just from like a purely marketing sense, to write a book. It's much easier, for example, to get invited to the American Library of Paris when you've written a book than when you've got a podcast. So it's opportunity to tell my story and to meet people and grow everything. So there you go. There's the whole reason why I did it, which is something I get asked a lot when people hear that I wrote a memoir. But I feel that's my first answer to my first question, and an easy question at that. Okay, second question. And remember, one thing I haven't talked about yet, something I like to do a lot is live videos where I walk around Paris, especially with a live YouTube video. I call them walk shows, walking with a guest, reading the comments as they come in. If you guys do have questions or comments or anything, I can read them while we go and even respond to them. So feel free to go as we go, because I quite like it. Question 2 out of 7. Why did I self-publish a book? So this book was self-published, and it's interesting because I initially didn't intend to do it this way. When I was writing, I was thinking, there's no way I want to do all the extra work. I'm going to immediately try and get someone to hopefully take it and turn it into a book. And then I was talking, often when I do interviews with authors on my own show, I talk to them afterwards and just hear their story. A prominent author in Paris, I don't know if he'd be comfortable with me saying his name, but a prominent author said to me, quite a prominent author indeed, said, and I will never forget this, he said, if I had the moxie, the mettle, and the gumption that you do, Oliver, I would self-publish my book in a heartbeat. And I thought, well, that's quite interesting. Firstly, I had to get my dictionary on a couple of those words. Moxie, I don't even think I'd ever heard that one before. But, maybe I do have moxie and mettle and gumption. So I started looking into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that if you've already got an audience, and this is a question I get a lot from people about self-publishing, how it works and why I did it. It's so much quicker. You can control it so much more. And if you have an audience, it's a way easier way to get a really quick head start. But also on top of that, I don't know how much you guys know about books and how authors make money from them, but from what I see, and I'm sure Catherine, our host tonight, probably knows more about this than I do, but it's a bit of a rip-off for the authors, to be quite honest. Not just like these people who do it as a career, it's a tough gig, I think. And then on top of that, companies like I'll tell you what Amazon pays when they print off one of my books, and I get a commission from it. It's $3, $3 which when I started hearing these things, I was like, this is crazy. It makes way more sense to self-publish. So against my own initial choice, I decided to self-publish it. And the short version is I did a Kickstarter. I pre-sold it. So I said to maybe some of you guys here, in fact, I'm certain some of you guys here were on that. Some people smiling there, I think you were probably there for it. But I, pre-sold it and used those earnings to publish the book. And then the general public, I suppose, had the chance to hear their reviews and so on. And that's how it's continued over this past, I guess, 8 months or something. So there you go. Someone asked me what I learned from self-publishing a book, and that it is a lot of work. It's a heck of a lot more work, but it's really nice to be totally in control. And that's kind of a theme, I think, for the people who read the book or who've read it. Being able to control your own destiny sounds a bit lame, doesn't it? But I think you know what I mean. Like being able to be in control of what happens, which is kind of what I did with this podcast and turn that into a career. It's just a lot more satisfying. And I really enjoyed the journey. In fact, that's what we've done with the second book that I'm going to talk about later, and takes a lot less time to read. But that's for later. That's for question 7. Question 3. I'm going to get into territory I haven't talked about with the followers here who've probably read the book. I figured I'd talk about some stuff that I haven't talked about yet as I wait to see questions pop in. No one. Okay, you're just sitting back. Maybe you're all on the phones looking at the election results that we're not meant to be talking about. Question 3 for myself that I wrote. It's not really a question. I just wrote the red thread, how to make a memoir flow. Right? And when I say the red thread, some of you guys might think you know what I'm talking about, but you don't, because it's because I googled the red thread before I said this. And if you Google it, it goes to a sort of Chinese, I don't know if you'd call it a proverb, but it's like a storytelling technique that essentially everyone is bound to their destiny by a red thread that's tied around a finger. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Could I have a nod of the heads? A couple of people? Yeah. But that's not what it means. The way that I mean it here is in Swedish. My wife is Swedish, and I happen to speak Swedish. They say the red thread, or the röda tråden, is kind of, I think in English you might say a through line, what runs through a story to keep everything together. The way that I made this memoir flow, and I reckon a lot of people here maybe didn't even notice this, is over 5 years that I lived here, I did a linear story, right? So when I decided to make it this way, it became a lot easier to write. There are 9 chapters in the book, and each of those chapters are 6 months. And that's not explicitly written anywhere. Like I didn't say, oh, when you read this book, the first 6 months are 2015, January to July or whatever. But that's exactly what it is, to the month, pretty much. So that's the first way that I made it flow. But that's not the most interesting way. I think the most sort of interesting way that I learned as I was writing it is this red thread. Instead of having one thing that made the whole story tie together, I purposely told it in a way of having, I would say probably maybe 7 to 10 storylines, red threads, running through the whole book from chapter 1 through to chapter 9, that eventually get wound tighter until at the end everything sort of makes sense. Is someone doing exercise there? I love it. I love watching you guys while you're watching as well. The red threads that I mean, for example, are storylines, right? So I've jotted some of them down now in case I forgot what they were. But one of them, for example, so what I mean about them all coming together into making it a kind of happy sort of success story filled with all the struggles that come with it is things like, for example, coming to Paris where I didn't have the job that I have now. I had no friends. I spoke hardly any French. I just met Lena who is the woman that I ended up marrying, understanding the French people. These kind of, they're all the ones I noted down. So all these stories, when it starts, you'll see the book, and you guys who've read it will know, I didn't know anything. And I'm, like quite honest and self-deprecating in that manner. Like I didn't speak hardly anywhere near good enough French to be a journalist in doing the job that I was doing. I had to go out and interview people. In fact, I just remembered, and I didn't talk about it in the book at all, but I remember after one of the terrorist attacks in Paris, the editor sent me to interview the local Muslim community about how they felt they were being treated by French people in general. And my French wasn't at all very good. And it's such a sensitive, it's like extremely sensitive thing to ask someone on the street who you've just met. Talk about trying to build rapport in 2 seconds on such a heavy thing. So if you imagine doing that kind of job, speaking French like an Australian cow, as I did, it's tough, So all these stories like that, and then eventually figuring out French, eventually figuring out why I was having such troubles with banking and all this kind of stuff. Just tying it up each chapter so that by the end, I don't want to spoil the ending, but all those things were kind of fixed and things sort of were running smoothly. And, what is that, like a coming of age story as well? I don't know. There's a lot of these, and I thought it was really interesting afterwards that I'd sort of almost, like the 6 months by 6 month thing, I think that was pretty well thought out, but it wasn't until I was doing the final editing of the book that I realized this idea of how to make a book like that flow. I bet some of you guys are probably writing a book right now as we speak, and that's something that I found really helped and really tied it together. And I think it's maybe why the book has resonated with people. The fact that people who've read the book want to be here tonight, which is just such a lovely compliment. Now, after going on about these Swedish red threads, I'm going to look through the comments before we get on to question 4. Berta, how many times did you rewrite the text? I didn't, that's tough. I didn't rewrite it so much as like I kept building it and I found the chapters that maybe were lacking, in size even. Like, chapter 3, why didn't I write so much about that? Maybe that's a good point to tell the story of how I invited the basketballers over to teach me about, I didn't invite them, they invited themselves. The night the towering Normandy basketballers came over to my house to explain cheese to me. In fact, that's quite a story we could even get into. But in short, it wasn't so much rewriting. Like I filled it up rather than constantly rewriting until I was ready to print a draft out. And then I probably just tried to make it funnier and more entertaining. I hardly at all went back and said, "No, I've got to take out this chapter or reposition it." I just kept rewriting bits to make it more entertaining. And that's something I want to stress, if I can say so myself. I really want it to be an entertaining book. That's just the same with the podcast. So it was more rewriting bits to try and make them funny. You guys who've read it, when my French neighbor asked me if I was afraid of ice, and me trying to figure out or my French neighbor who always called me wino. He just always called me wino. He's like, "Oh, come around to my place, wino." And I never figured it out until like a year. So these, just making that more, rewriting it. And I'm not going to tell you what he really meant because then you'd never get the book. I have a painting called The Red Thread, made with red thread, says Daria. That's amazing. Can you hold it up, Daria? You're allowed to unmute yourself if you can find it and hold up. I'd love to see it. Jim McPherson, MVP Jim, says, what comments from your friends and family were most supportive to you while you were writing? I'll tell you something, Jim. I hardly told anyone that I was... Where is Jim, by the way? I want to see who I'm talking to. Can you wave if you're... No, I can't see you. Okay. I hardly told anyone. It was one of the biggest surprises for my friends as we sat down for... I took them out for drinks or dinner. Or I say took them out. We all went out and I said, well, I'm launching a Kickstarter next week because I've written a book. And they thought I was kidding because I didn't talk about it. Personally, one of the things, and this is personal, so no, I'm not judging anybody in the room or who's watching this in the future, but one of my sort of pet peeves is hearing about the book they're writing for 20 years. Those kind of stories. I'm always like, get on with it. Go on, get on to the next book. There's so much to get on with it. And I didn't want to be that guy. personal preference. And I didn't want to tell my friends all the time, oh, I'm writing a book, until they got sick of it. So I hardly told anyone. So no one, and definitely no one read it, not even my parents. In fact, when I published it, only my wife and two people who helped with the editing, so one proofreader and one editor, had read it. So I purposely didn't look for anyone's support, Jim. But that was a unique question. Red thread equals fil conducteur in French. I don't know, maybe. A couple more questions before I get on with it. What feedback have you gotten from Parisians on your book and podcast? If by Parisians you mean expats who live here, a lot of them have said that they, and I'm sure you don't mean that, but I'll start with that. A lot of them have said that they saw themselves in it, going through all the problems, like the time I got overdrawn thousands of euros on my bank and was getting charged 20 euros every time I used my card, and going in to try and negotiate that while I couldn't speak French and just getting basically kicked out. Those stories resonate with people, but where my story is a little bit more fun is I went back with a TV, what do you call it, TV host, a French TV host, who went in there and did this good cop, bad cop routine to get all my money refunded. So, what was I talking about here? Okay, from Parisians, most French people don't read English books about Paris, but the few that have read it really liked it. And one common thread with that is a few French people who've read it were really touched by the chapter about the November attacks. I don't know. I found that really interesting. I think maybe seeing it with foreign eyes for them maybe was something. Hillary, can you read some funny passages, please? Put me on the spot, Hillary. Maybe, if we don't run out of time, if I get through my 7 questions, I'll read some for you for sure. Let's say 2 more. Love your red thread technique. Pulling those threads together makes for a satisfying read for me. Will you write more books? That's question 7, Carla. Thank you. Berta, does Paris still have many things to discover for you and Lena? Which city would you choose next to live for your next 2 to 5 to 10 years? There's loads going on in Paris. And for my podcast, which I essentially tell a story or share someone else's story every week, I think if you struggle to find new stories in Paris, then you're going to struggle to find stories in general, Like, you can always re-interview someone. I've talked to some guests 3 or 4 times, and I could do it 3 or 4 times more. Or I've done an episode on, like cemeteries, but then you could do, here's a preview for my upcoming podcast episode. There are like 70 wild cats that live in the Montmartre cemetery. And I'm just going to go there with my microphone like tomorrow and interview the cats. So there's all these stories. Okay, I'm not going to interview the cats. I love the people that are moving their head laughing. Thank you so much. But do a story about that. There's just all these stories there. In terms of other cities, I don't know. I was really thinking about doing additional Eiffel Towers like in Rome and Stockholm. But this whole pandemic that we shouldn't talk about too much sort of ruined those plans a little bit, didn't they? Okay, I'm going to go back to my questions for a bit. Oh, here's a curveball from myself. Is Paris on Air worth reading? Oh, how did that slip in there? How am I meant to answer a question like that? I don't know. I think it really is. I think a lot of people, in all seriousness, it's very light. It's a light book. I've been reading, I got a French book club that I run, where every month for the past 2 years I pick a book about Paris or France and read it. And always at the back of my head, you're reading it as a writer yourself and thinking of, even if you don't want to, you compare it to your own stuff. And mine's just super light and entertaining. And I think the world needs it. That's what I say. So yeah, that was a curveball of a question, but I'll answer it. I think it's not full of facts like a lot of the other memoirs are, where I feel like a lot of them will read each other's work, to be honest, but they quote from Voltaire and talk about this and that, but I just sort of more took people on a journey, and that was the goal with the book. Okay, question 5. I wrote, what do I get asked about the most? Because I find that interesting. People read the book, what do they ask about? And the honest answer there is I've done maybe 40 or maybe 50 of these kind of Zoom calls, but almost all with the Alliance Française chapters around, especially the States. Almost all in the States. So the question I get asked about all the time is how to, tricks to learn French, essentially. Secrets and shortcuts. And I talk about that a lot in the book. And my answer to that is find a French person and force yourself to speak their language with them. Just force yourself. As in, if you don't know the word for chair in French, You don't say to him, oh oui, mais c'est quoi le mot pour chair? You try and describe the word chair, which is even harder, you know? Like, I forgot the word that when I was in the cemetery the other day talking to the guys, and the reason I'm in the cemetery so much is because we're in lockdown again, and that's within my kilometer, so I've been there like every day, which is a pretty unusual existence. But I forgot the French word for to feed, which many of you probably know is nourrir, right? I forgot the word. So I'm asking the guy, is it legal to feed the cats? Or is it illegal because everyone's in there feeding them? And I couldn't think of the word, so I think I felt like I sounded like Borat talks English, you know? So I was like, is it legal to give nourishment to cats? You know, like that's how it was an atrocity. But the fact of trying to get by and them correctly go, oui, nourrir, right, is the best way to learn, rather than just jump into English. And the other thing I always get asked is, how did I make French friends? And it's a fair question because it's hard to meet Parisians in Paris, believe it or not, and they've got pretty strong cliques. But what I always advise is I play basketball. Not a lot, but a lot of the way I found myself in situations in Paris has come from playing basketball. I play basketball. I'm good enough at it that I can play with strangers without embarrassing myself. And then through meeting them, you get invited to other things, and that really got me into sort of a social life here. And I assume not everyone here plays basketball, but those kind of things, like maybe you join a knitting club, people shaking their heads, maybe you have something that you know about and you want to talk about, you want to do, makes a huge difference. I've got 2 more questions, so I'm just going to pop into I'm going to change screen, so I'm looking at 25 new people here, and I'm going to see the comments here. Shelley says, I couldn't put the book down. I read the whole thing in one day. Where's Shelley? I need to see. Maybe her or his camera is off. But that's a lovely thing. Those comments make me want to write a second book, which we'll talk about in question 7. Thanks, Shelley. Stephanie, what are your 1 to 2 suggestions, must-dos for someone moving to Paris next year? I tell you, I got a good answer for this, actually. Something that I did, and I did an episode about it once, is instead of giving you 1 to 2 suggestions, I'll give you 1, is you write a bucket list. And I did this with my friends, and it was hugely fun and rewarding, is you write a bucket list with 5 things to do before the end of the year. And you share it with all your friends, and they go in, and you guys can do this next time you come to Paris as a tourist, if you're not all here already. Although judging by some of your backgrounds, you're definitely not all in Paris. But you write 5 things in ascending order of difficulty to do. So number 1 would be, try that cafe on the other side of town you've always wanted to check. Just really easy. And then number 5 is, front row seats at the opera, or go to Asterix World, or whatever. And then with the people you're traveling with or your friends, you try and get through that list. And what we were doing is that we'd say, hey guys, I'm doing number 4 on my list. We had this big document. I'm going to I don't know, Disneyland or Disney World or whatever it's called here. I've never been. And then you go, who wants to come? And then, it brought people together as well. So there's what you should do when you come to Paris. Stephanie. Emily, yes, it is worth reading. Light, funny, relatable, and inspiring. Wow, thank you very much. Jean, will you take more weekend escapes out of Paris to share with your members, as you did recently in Burgundy? Very interesting. Jean, we can't, is the quick answer. We're not allowed to travel. So no, but I want to, and I hope to do that. Caitlin says, running club. Yeah, good example. Shelley says she's waving, but I missed her. Please talk about Kylie. I'll get to that, question 7. Now, question 6. How do 2 Paris lockdowns... What a perfect flow. How do 2 Paris lockdowns affect an author? I'll keep this short because I realize time's getting away from me quickly. The big thing that changed for me, which was such a shame, but I know everybody... In fact, I know probably everyone's had plans change. But we had, my wife and I had plans to do this mega US road trip. And I mean like enormous. And I guess we talk about America, same as the American Library. We bought tickets. We're going to start in Seattle, drive down to San Diego, up right through the middle to Chicago, across to Boston, New York, and then down to Miami over like 6 to 8 weeks. And I'd started talking about on the podcast. We had all these amazing invites to a woman in Chicago emailed, and she's like, do an event. I run the Guinness World Record largest outdoor rooftop terrace in the world. There's room for 900. She goes, there's room for like 12 to 900 people. And I was like, well, let's lean towards 12 people, but it sounds really amazing. So we'd planned out this whole journey, and I was going to print off all these books. Oh my goodness. And then obviously it got cancelled. But on a more positive note, how lockdowns affect an author or a podcaster is it, for me anyway, being creative is a really good way to get through it. So one thing that I did during two things I did during the last lockdown. One is I turned Paris on Air into an audiobook. And audiobook is not the right word to use because personally I think many audiobooks are really lame. Like it's an author reading someone else's, an actor reading someone else's words, especially for a personal book like this. So I recorded it myself, but I got every character from the book to read their own lines. Partly because I wanted an excuse to ring people during lockdown, but partly because I thought it would add such a strong dimension to it, right? So this neighbor who always called me Wino, like he read his lines and I clipped it in. So the conversations feel really real. And then at the end of all the chapters, and I hardly ever talk about this, but I get emails from people who listen to it. At the end of the chapters of the audiobook, or the smaller chapters, the sub-chapters, I often chatted with the people. So Stefan, my neighbor, at the end of that chapter, I was like, do you remember that, Stefan? What did you think about that? And then we just chatted, and it's really like, it opens the book on a whole new level. Including like, there's a wedding scene. I'm not going to get into it too deeply, but at the end of that, even though my grandma didn't have any lines in the book, well, she had one word really, but I chatted with her about the wedding afterwards, and it was really touching. I added this whole new dimension to the book, so that's really cool, and I highly encourage you guys to check that out because I'm super proud of it. And then it also the lockdown helped me with question 7, which is what next? It's a question I love to ask on the podcast to everybody. What next? And for me, there's 2 things coming up. One is I already started writing a sort of follow-up book. Well, it's not a sort of follow-up book. It is a follow-up. I just think this lockdown has been huge. Like, as terrible as everything is. Oh, who was that? Berta did a fist pump in the air. What encouraging thing to see. As tragic and terrible as all this lockdown and everything is, it's been hugely fascinating, intriguing time for Paris to be here during these lockdowns. And I've got a lot of sort of interesting things, things on the horizon. I probably want to try and become French, for example. I think there's bound to be interesting stories there. But the other thing is, I wrote a children's book called Kylie, the Crocodile, and I think we've got 5 minutes before I'm meant to turn this officially over to Q&A. So that's what I'm going to talk about for 5 minutes. This, I'm sure many of you already know this, but you can ask me more questions if you want. But long story into 5 minutes, and this is an example of the memoir book and how it opened doors, is in the podcast I'd heard that there was a beaver swimming in the canal Saint-Martin, just a beaver. I'd seen it, and I went looking for it, and I was doing this podcast episode about could there really be a beaver? Like it was almost conspiracy theory kind of, are there beavers in the canal? And I'm going around interviewing people. It was a bit of fun, and I met this elderly lady, and I asked her, I just started talking with her. She spoke really good English. She was Parisian. I said, do you think there might be animals in there? And you should go listen to it because she was she was just brilliant. But my version of how she responded is she said, yes, there are animals in the canal. And I said, oh yeah, like beavers? She said, yes, why not? In fact, there are crocodiles. I was like, what, crocodiles in the canal? And she said, and I was really incredulous, but I wanted to hear more. She said, well, yes, I released 2 crocodiles, babies, into the canal 1 year ago. And I just had a million questions. I asked them all, and she gave really good answers. And I totally believe it. And I told that 30-second story over a small sort of chapter in the book. And I made a podcast episode out of it. And it really got legs. Like, it got written up in newspapers. It's been in other books. It's a story that really just got carried further and further. And so during this lockdown, my wife was an illustrator, and I just decided to turn it into a children's book. So we retold that bit that I told you over the first couple of pages, and then the next 30 pages or so are just following the life of Kylie the Crocodile as she explores Paris during the night. And during the day, she sneaks around looking through the storm drains, people watching, as we all sort of do. So, well, we don't usually do it through storm drains, do we? But that's, I suppose, what a crocodile would do. So that's the project that I've been working on, and it was we did that through Kickstarter, and it was a raging success. We pre-sold like 1,000 copies. So what that means is that we can turn it into a better book. We're going to do it with this like really beautiful hardcover now, matte finishing. And we're going to send it, I'm not kidding, I'm not saying this just for the show, we're going to send it in to be printed tonight, like in the next probably 2 hours or something. So I'm uber excited about it, and there she is. I'll show you what she looks like for all you guys watching. Kylie, the crocodile in Paris, there she is. You can see reflected the Eiffel Tower in the window there, and then, you know, by me and Lena there. And then, before we get into whatever questions you might have. Wow, I did that in 2 minutes. I thought that would take 5. I'll show you one of the pages because I quite like it, to be honest. Look, so this is when the woman takes a crocodile, and in the book she buys it at a pet shop, and then it starts growing too big. So this is how the page goes. I'll read it to you like you're all children, right? I'll show you the pictures. So she grew. You see that? She grew. Too big for the fish tank, too big for the sink, too big for the bathtub, wouldn't you think? There's more. Look at this one. Too big for, you see that? Too big for the bathroom, too big for the hall. In each room she reached from the wall to the wall. The old lady figured this just couldn't be. There must be a place to set poor Kylie free. Ooh. So that's the story we've been working on, and we're super pumped to be sending it to the printers tonight. So it'll get to people in time for Christmas. So there you go. That's the end of me interviewing myself. And then let me look for your questions. And then I think we got 13 minutes where you can ask me anything. Who is that? Berta? Berta's kid there seemed really excited with that. Were you flashing a laser at me? You got me! You got me! Okay, now I'm going to answer questions for 12 minutes before we switch back to Catherine, and I'll answer anything. Literally, you can ask me anything. Alright, where were we up to? Please talk about Kylie, I did that one. Caitlin says, but not New Orleans? No, not for the tour, but it doesn't matter, it didn't happen anyway. Ashley, please write a second book. Reading Paris on Air was an absolute delight. I was so sad when I finished it. That's a new one. In all seriousness, Ashley, if you were really sad when you read it, some people who've read it listened to the audio afterwards, and it felt like a whole nother book for them. And I'm not just saying that because I want you to listen to it. I know you've already read it, but it might keep it going for a while. Laura, are you as passionate about Australia as you are about Paris? No, no, not at all. Weirdly, I'm not. I don't know why. Paris really captured me. It was weird. I lived in Sweden for 5 years before Paris. And Sweden didn't capture me at all either. I really liked it there, and the people are friendly, and the language there really captured me, and I was interested in it. But walking around Paris is, well, it's unbeatable. That's why everyone's here tonight. That's why people listen to my podcast, because Paris is I tell people sometimes the real guest of my podcast, and kind of my book is Paris. And I'm going to have a sip of water because I'm losing my voice. Come stay with us in Kansas and go to Little Sweden in Lindsborg, although I bet it's pronounced Lindsborg. In Kansas. All right, Christina, I'm on my way. Laura Lee says, Bonsoir, Michael and I not only read the book, but also listened to the audio while on a road trip from New York to Washington, D.C. We thoroughly enjoyed it all over again. There you go. You're a wordsmith and kept us in the palm of your hand during the entire book. Twice. We'd love to host you when you come to the East Coast at a winery we're members of. Long comment, but I must introduce you to my 7'4" basketball friend, Mark Eaton. Yeah. Okay, I'm in. Cannot wait to read Kylie and give to our nieces. Mille merci, Oliver. Thanks so much. That's super kind. And we'll visit you as well if we ever get over there. I'd love to go to wineries and stuff and do tours. That was the plan. Thank you. Daria, I've gotten to know the local butcher through lockdown. One of the things I love about France, knowing the local merchants. I'll give you a tip that I talk about in the book that works in France, and I did it as recently as today, and it definitely works, is if you want people to, if you want to go from small talk to medium talk really quickly and have a fun relationship with your butcher or your baker, but especially your fruit and veg guys, but this joke works for them all, is when they say ça va, like bonjour ça va, don't just say ça va, oui ça va, merci. I say to them j'ai la pêche, which literally means I have the peach, but which more means like, you know, maybe it means like I'm peachy happy or whatever. It just means I'm really happy. But it's so weird for a foreigner to say that. I say it in a fruit shop and they still think it's funny. I don't know. I feel like they would have got that all the time. But I did that today and they lost it laughing. And then I added j'ai la banane. I have the banana as well, which means you have a smile like a banana. Because I thought I was, you know, it's lockdown. I was trying to make them laugh. And it works. And then they're more likely, if you know, don't have much French, like I definitely didn't, and still, you know, I'm not perfect at all. It's a really good way to spring the conversation forward and not just be glossed over like everybody else. But I'm glad to hear that, Daria. I'm glad someone else is here in France. Is the book in French? Neither of the books in French. And will they be later? I don't know. Not a priority, because everything I do is in English. Ashley can't wait for the Kylie book. Brilliant. Is Kylie in French? No. Oliver, you absolutely ooze charm, says JMCD. Thank you. On Air was great. I joined the club today. Have you... Oh, you left me on the edge of my seat there. Have I? Yeah, I have. Why not? But what they're referring to there is the club. If you get into this stuff and you really like it, the way, before I wrote books or anything, the way that I turned the hobby into a job, and I'm not exaggerating here, 2 years ago I was flat broke, like broke. And by choice, I'd quit my job and I'd been doing freelancing journalism for newspapers around the world, and I quit that as well. And I started a membership club where people could get more from for a really perfect example. The podcast on Monday is going to be about the cats in the Montmartre cemetery, right? And then the idea probably will be later in the week, I'll go and do a live video walk like this with people watching just around the cemetery, showing it, but you have to be a member to watch it. Is anyone here members? And can you wave just so I... Deborah, yes. Jean, yeah, I see a few people. Okay, you guys get it. There's proof that people are there and it's not some weird cult. Patreon membership, and there's a link at the bottom of that, earfultower.com/ALP. But JMCD, thanks for joining the club, if that's what you're referring to. Is there a good story that came from making a book with your partner, says Caitlin? Talking about the children's book. That's a good question. I think what was really interesting was how little we're experts in each other's fields, and we'll both totally accept that. But because the text is rhyming, as I hope you noticed when I read the bit, but I'm like quite pedantic about I guess you call it the meter, you know, like too big for the hallway, too big for the sink, da-dun, da-da-dun, da-dun, da-dun. And sometimes I'd say to Lena, I just don't feel that works. And she'd go, eventually, and we didn't sort of admit it to each other at first, but eventually she was like, I just don't hear it. I don't hear it, I'm going to be honest. And she's like, you can't ask me, I can't help you. And it's the same with her drawings, her illustrations. I can't tell the difference between putting the tree there or the tree there. I just can't. Like, I'm like, that looks great, I love it. She'd be like, no, it's wrong, it's wrong. So that was, for me, that was really fascinating, seeing our strengths and weaknesses, and really lovely to know that they can complement each other for a project like this. All right. Was living in Paris a dream before the opportunity presented itself, says Laura. I guess it was. I'd studied French at school, in high school, and had been in university, so it must have been in the back of my mind. And I still remember, in fact, I've done a big story about the first time I came to Paris. I'm not going to tell it now because it's in the book and I've told it many times. I'm sure people don't want to hear it anymore, but when the 22nd version, the first time I came here was with my 12-year-old brother, and we hadn't booked accommodation correctly. And we looked set to sleep on a bench, and he's 12 and a young 12 at that. We looked set to sleep on a bench on the Champs-Élysées on the recommendation of a woman from a tourism office, until the fickle goddess of fortune stepped in and saved the day, and that is all I'm saying. But these things in the back of my mind really, you know, they really, I guess, were giving me this idea of living in Paris one day, probably, because I didn't have them anywhere else. Michelle Beckwith, more Earful Sweden. Got very good news for you coming up, which I don't want to give away too much about, but if you guys are even remotely interested in Sweden, the best thing you can do is follow at the Earful Sweden on Instagram, because that's where I'll talk more about it. And I don't want to dilute the Paris stuff with talking about Sweden, but there is definitely more to come sooner than you think. A few more minutes left. These questions are flowing in. I'm going to keep getting through them. Most challenging word for you to pronounce in English? I'm learning in English there are some words I can't pronounce. contemplative today. Took me about 5 minutes to try and figure out. How about that? But in French, there are loads that I can't say. The ones that are the funniest, I think, and the most irritating for all of us are when you think you're saying something correctly that's really basic and they don't understand it. And a good example, I didn't use it in the book, but I was trying to say that I was nervous to Stefan, my neighbor, who's kind of one of the main characters in the start of the book. And I want to say I was nervous, and he just didn't understand because he thought I was saying 9 o'clock. And to me, they sounded exactly the same. 9 o'clock is 9 heures, but nervous is nerveux. And to me, 5 years ago, they sounded exactly the same. And I was saying, oh, Stefan, I was really 9 o'clock. And that's how he must have heard it. Oh, so 9 o'clock today. Oh, and he's like, what are you saying? I was like, 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock. He goes, what? He just didn't get it. And I was getting really irritated. I was like, how do I say it? What nervous? And he said, oh, nerveux. I was like, well, that sounds exactly the same. So for me, it's really common words I sometimes mispronounce. And it took me years to be able to say tu correctly, which is more like tu instead of tu. Like I thought it rhymed with vu, but whoa, way off there. Where is the illustrator of my books now? Oh, she's in another room, Jennifer. You'll have to see her on the Eiffel Tower channels rather than the American Library of Paris channels. Jean, will you take more weekend escapes? Didn't I answer that one already? No. I think you switched off for a while there, Jean. We're not allowed to. Don't rub it in. We're stuck in Paris. 1 kilometer. You want the countryside? It's not going to happen. But when things get back to normal, absolutely. Would you write another experience-based book, this time in comic book fashion? That's a really good question. Probably not, because I already have really good ideas for about 4 more children's books. Seeing this Kickstarter success and selling 1,000 books was really overwhelming, and it made me realize that there's an appetite for me and Lena to work together. Gosh, it feels like I'm promoting Kylie the Crocodile and not the real one here. Don't forget that one, guys, but yeah, maybe I will. But I've got like 4 more pretty much written in my head and on paper. What language do I speak with Lena at home? English. Her English is perfectly fluent, and my Swedish is pretty fluent, but it's not perfectly fluent, so why would we not speak English? The only time we speak Swedish together is when we're in Sweden, or when we're talking about someone behind their back in Paris, which has at least once turned out that we were talking about a Swede behind their back. And that was really awkward. And I'm not kidding, that actually happened. And I didn't say anything too bad, but the lesson there, the moral is don't talk about people behind their backs, I suppose. I suppose we have 3 minutes, so I think I can get through 3 or 4 questions left. What town area are you from in Australia, says Karen. We were there for 2 years and loved it. I was born in Melbourne. Grew up on the East Coast, all the main cities and towns there, we moved a lot, and then a lot of time in Perth on the West Coast, but I haven't lived there for about 10 years, which is probably why I don't have the really strong Australian accent like Crocodile Dundee and Kylie Minogue and all those people that you guys probably think, g'day mate, how you going, Australian accent. I don't have that so much. Come on, more questions. Let's see. Christina, it's strange to me that English is so illogical, but French you can analyze and imagine. Yeah, that's not really a question, Christina, but it's a good point. It is, English is I would hate to learn English as a second language. It's a difficult language. Have I seen Emily in Paris? Thoughts? Nah, I'm not in any rush to see it. I've seen everyone's been panning it, and everyone's doing all the articles about it, and I just figured I'll let everyone go for it. If I'm going to watch it, it'll be because I've got it, and I don't, but it'll be because I've somehow managed to get an interview with the guy that made it. Darren Star is his name? If he came on my show for an interview, I'd watch the whole series in back to back to back. What are the pros and cons of living in Montmartre, says Nico? That's a good question. The pros are I can see the Eiffel Tower from almost here if I lean forward a little bit. And usually I'd pick up the laptop and dangle it over the balcony to show everybody, but everything's balanced very precariously, including a light and a microphone, and it's not worth it. Follow me on Instagram and I'll do a video later tonight and show the spinning eye of Sauron on top and the sparkling lights. The pros are being able to see the Eiffel Tower and the charm of Rue des Abbesses and so on. The cons is it's too small. Like, you can't, if you have to move house like we did, there's nowhere to park a car. There's nowhere to, The sidewalk on the street that I live on is about that big. But here comes the last question. There's 3 to choose from. I think I'll go with Kim Loftus, because Kim Loftus has been around following the earful for a long time. She's a friend of the show even. And she says, I enjoy your episodes on cemeteries. Does that make you a taphophile, I think is the word. Which one is my favorite? Hands down, Montmartre. The Père Lachaise is, everyone goes there, there's too many tourists and so on. But Montmartre is very, I don't know, it's charming and quiet and beautiful and lots of cats. I saw a few cats walking across people's laps during this very conversation, so I think you guys will like my content from there coming next week. But that is our time. I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. I'm going to pass the mic, as it were, back to Catherine. But thanks for watching so attentively and for all your head bobbling and clapping. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Catherine.